Thank you very much for having me for this AIA lecture series. My name is Munyaradzi Elton Sagiya, and today I'm going to be presenting Great Zimbabwe, one of the most famous archaeological sites in Southern Africa and even beyond. And Great Zimbabwe is famous for its dry stone built architecture. And what is striking is the skill of building such gigantic walls without use of any binding material, cement, or any other materials to bind these stone structures together. And this has also made Great Zimbabwe one of the most challenging and difficult archaeological sites to preserve and conserve. And basing on my experience in the conservation field, both from an indigenous perspective and scientific, this lecture is going to focus on the indigenous knowledge, skills and practices of conserving this world-renowned archaeological site. So the lecture will be comprised of the following key elements. First of all, I'm going to situate myself within the context of Great Zimbabwe as a local person myself. And I'm also going to provide a broader historical and archaeological context of Great Zimbabwe, where I will also focus on Great Zimbabwe and nationalism, how Great Zimbabwe has played an important role in nationhood. I will also introduce the indigenous communities surrounding Great Zimbabwe before I get into the details of the dry stone architecture. And I will also move on to introduce different conservation philosophies and approaches that were introduced in the conservation of Great Zimbabwe when the Zimbabwean plateau was colonized in the 1890s. I will then focus on the indigenous knowledge, skills and approaches in the conservation of Great Zimbabwe, which is the key theme of my presentation. So this is the general outline of this lecture. I grew up in Nemanwa communal area, which is located about 3 kilometers southwest of the Great Zimbabwe. And growing up in the shadows of Great Zimbabwe, the gigantic dry stone walls became a familiar viewscape for me. And this largely influenced me to then study archaeology as a degree program. And when I completed this program in 2009, I was very fortunate to be employed at the site as one of the curators in charge of research as well as the conservation of the site. So over the years, I've been using my indigenous knowledge that I gained through listening to oral history narratives about Great Zimbabwe. I've been combining this knowledge with the scientific knowledge that I gained through study of archaeology to further understand Zimbabwe, basing on these two different forms of knowledge. And in this lecture, I will also base my arguments and my presentation on the knowledges that I have acquired as a local person, as well as a curator who has been trained in the field of archaeology and conservation of archaeological heritage sites. So for those who may not be familiar with the site of Great Zimbabwe, I will try to provide a general archaeological overview of the site before I get into other details that I've outlined. So that's the Nemanwa township where I grew up from. And you can see it's very close to the site of Zimbabwe, which is now a World Heritage Site and a state property. So to those who may not be familiar with the site of Great Zimbabwe and its archaeological context, the name Zimbabwe is actually a Shona name that means houses of stones. And the name refers or means the architecture or the skill of building in dry stone architecture, which is not only unique to this specific site, but this tradition marks the rise and development as well as the fall of complex state societies in Southern Africa. So the dry stone was just a distinction, according to archaeologists and other researchers. It was a way of distincting the societies of that particular time, where the elite argued to have been residing within the walled spaces, and the commoners or the non-elite were residing outside the walled areas. And for Great Zimbabwe, archaeologists have categorized the site into 4 major zones: the hill complex, the valley enclosures, as well as the great enclosure. But according to my elders from my clan, they simply refer to Great Zimbabwe as Zimbabwe, which means stately residence. And as I've already highlighted, this tradition of building in dry stone walling architecture was not only confined to Zimbabwe, but it is a tradition that is also spread throughout Southern Africa. So similar sites are also found in Botswana, South Africa, as well as Mozambique, as illustrated on that site distribution of the Zimbabwe culture sites. And in Zimbabwe, there is an argument that we have more than 360 recorded sites. Also, in terms of importance of these archaeological sites, we have some that have also attained national and international importance. For instance, Kami is one of the sites that closely relates to Great Zimbabwe. It was gazetted as a national monument, and it is also a World Heritage Site. Another example of similar sites to Great Zimbabwe that have also assumed national and international importance is the Nalitali, which is recognized as one of the most decorated Zimbabwe type sites in Southern Africa. And at Nalitali, you would find more than 3 different types of decorations that were used by the original builders to beautify these capitals. The rise and fall of Great Zimbabwe has also been a subject of study amongst archaeologists, and basing on the material evidence, there is an argument that the rise of Great Zimbabwe was a combination of different economic, political, as well as social activities, as evidenced by different archaeological deposits that have been recovered from the site. Trade has been recognized as one of the major a contributing factor to the rise and development of Great Zimbabwe. And some of the evidence recovered include gold objects and other objects such as glass beads and so on and so forth. And because of its influence as well as its size, Great Zimbabwe has attracted a number of academic research that has resulted in a large corpus of academic literature, such as the ones that I have just assembled. And of interest is the 2021 publication, a book by Professor Shadrach Chirikure, currently based at the University of Oxford, who has given the title to his book, Great Zimbabwe, Reclaiming a Confiscated Past. So Great Zimbabwe continues to be a subject of debate and discussion among archaeologists, historians, anthropologists, and other scholars within humanities. Now, moving on to the role of Great Zimbabwe in nationhood and nation building, you could find that prior to independence, for independence, Great Zimbabwe acted as the rallying point for African nationalists. And in the 1961, that's when the African political parties started to name themselves after this archaeological site. For example, the Zimbabwe African People's Union, ZAPU, which is one of the first African political parties to seriously engage itself in the struggle for independence. They had named themselves after Great Zimbabwe. And when the country attained independence in 1980, it was decided that the newly independent country was supposed to be renamed after this particular site, hence the name Zimbabwe. And in addition to that, different government institutions and departments adopted architectural features as well as artifacts from the site as their national symbols. We have organizations such as the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption. They have adopted the conical tower, which is one of the features for Zimbabwe, as their symbol, as well as the Zimbabwe bird. We also have the ruling party, ZANU-PF. They also adopted the same conical tower as their national symbol. One of the state universities is actually named after this site, and in addition, it went on to adopt the architectural features as its symbols. So there is so much value that the nation of Zimbabwe gives to the site, such that the features from the site have been adopted for various commemorative events as well as national symbols. And recently in 2016, the then president for Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, decided to celebrate his 92nd birthday within the core zone of Great Zimbabwe. And this witnessed the convergence of delegates from different parts of the country at the site to commemorate this event, which had became part of our national event. And in the following day, state newspapers such as the Sunday Mail had headlines such as "Nation goes back to its roots." So as a nation, Great Zimbabwe plays an important role in terms of identity as well as nationalism. Now, I want to introduce to you the composition of the local communities around Great Zimbabwe and how they perceive or what they value about this particular archaeological site. Around Great Zimbabwe, there are 4 historic communities that have been settled within this landscape dating as back as 17th century. And these communities are the Nemanwa, the Mugabe, the Charumbira, and the Morinye clans. Prior to colonization, these communities were contesting over the traditional custodianship of the site. And in particular, the Mugabe and the Nemanwa, they were actually residing within the site that was later on turned into a government property and a national monument. And when that happened, these communities were evicted from the site, but they've remained settled close to the site within the same cultural landscape and advocating for the revival and use of the site for traditional and religious practices, rituals, and ceremonies. So amongst the local communities, Great Zimbabwe is not about the dry stone architecture, but Great Zimbabwe is a shrine. It is a site where they would want to come to conduct their ceremonies, their rituals, and some of the clans have their ancestors buried within the archaeological landscape. So they would always want to periodically come and pay homage to their ancestral graves. And these communities have also a close ancestral link and claim that they would want a situation where they are given the right to ownership and of the site. Beyond the local communities, there are also different national and international interested stakeholders and groups that also are interested in using Great Zimbabwe for different objectives and purposes. And these include local authorities, research institutions such as universities, as well as tourists who always want to visit Great Zimbabwe for entertainment, as well as educating themselves about this ancient civilization. So as I have already highlighted, one of the striking physical attribute of Great Zimbabwe is its dry stone architecture. At this juncture, I will try to introduce the different architectural details of Great Zimbabwe. I will start with the construction material. The walls at Great Zimbabwe were built out of the granite stones quarried from the nearby granite outcrops. But in the history of the Zimbabwe culture sites, or those sites that are similar to Great Zimbabwe, they were not only constructed out of granite, but they were making use of other materials such as sandstone. But the predominant material that was used to construct Great Zimbabwe and other similar sites remains granite, though sandstone was used in some cases. For example, the sites that are found in northwestern Zimbabwe, they were predominantly constructed using sandstone. And Great Zimbabwe, in terms of its architecture, has been categorized into different zones the hill complex, the valley, the great enclosure, and the peripheral sites, those smaller sites that are found within the cultural landscape. In terms of sizes, the walls at Great Zimbabwe varies with regards to height between 1 meter to 11 meters. Then in terms of the width, the walls also vary between around 1 meter to 6 meters. And there are two major types of walling at Great Zimbabwe, the freestanding walls as well as the retaining walls. The freestanding walls were built to enclosures in which inside those enclosures there were houses built of pole and ducker, then thatched using grass. Then the retaining walls were basically constructed to create platforms on which on top houses were constructed. And in 1959, an architect, Anthony Whitty, studied the architecture of Great Zimbabwe and came up with 4 classifications: the poor walling, the quality walling, the poor quality walling, and the other walling, which refers to the rough walling. These classifications have been used during the documentation and recording of the conservation work at Great Zimbabwe. So that's the hill complex, juxtaposed the 1930 photograph to that of the recent 2020s, showing part of the hill complex. Then the great enclosure, where there is dominant of the quality walling, and this is one of the favorite zones for tourists at the site because of its beauty as well as its architectural prose. Then within the great enclosure, there is the conical tower, which has also generated a lot of controversy pertaining to why the builders of Great Zimbabwe ended up coming with a structure of that nature. So there have been so many questions about the function and the conical tower. The builders of Great Zimbabwe also enhanced the beauty of their structures by incorporating different decorations and patterns. At Great Zimbabwe, there are 2 still visible decorations, the chevron that is shown on this slide, as well as the herringbone, which is slowly disappearing at the site. So these were some of the decorations that the builders had to introduce in the dry stone walling architecture. So with the coming of Europeans in the early 19th century and the colonization of the Zimbabwean plateau, the scientific or Western ways of looking at dry stone walls at Great Zimbabwe were introduced in form of legislations, in form of entrance fees to the site, erection of fences, and all the indigenous communities that were residing within Great Zimbabwe were evicted. And the Great Zimbabwe became a site to conserve and not a site to use for spiritual or other community functions. These Western ways of looking after Great Zimbabwe were enhanced when the site became a World Heritage Site in 1986. And as such, the conservation and care of the site were now being guided by international institutions such as UNESCO They were also now being guided by international experts in conservation and restoration. This situation slowly alienated the local communities and their expertise in terms of the conservation and restoration of the site. When the site became a World Heritage Site, it was supposed to follow international conservation protocols and guidelines. And this led to the introduction of a conservation center at the site, which is still present. And this conservation center is manned by archaeologists, surveyors, conservators, and other experts with scientific knowledge. And these are the same expertise that decides in terms of what to conserve. And in so doing, there has been so much focus on conserving the architecture and the tangible aspects of Great Zimbabwe at the expense of the intangible and other customary values that the local communities associate Great Zimbabwe with. And as such, I now want to take you through some of the traditional conservation philosophies that had sustained Great Zimbabwe prior to the coming of the Europeans and the colonization of the Zimbabwean plateau. Before the colonization of Zimbabwe, Great Zimbabwe was being looked after by the traditional custodians from the Mugabe and lands that I have mentioned earlier. And these custodians played an important role of regulating entry and access. They were there to ensure that not everyone accessed Great Zimbabwe. And those few who were permitted to access Great Zimbabwe, they were supposed to follow certain regulations such as removal of any other foreign items that they might have been carrying or wearing. They were also supposed to pray at certain sections or places, because Great Zimbabwe then and even to this day was a sacred place that had to follow certain protocols, taboos, myth, and legends. So these are some of the ways that indigenous communities employed in making sure that Great Zimbabwe is well conserved and preserved. And in addition to that, the local communities also believed that ancestral spirits can also communicate through physical fabric, such as the dry stone walls. So in the event that the walls had collapsed, according to the local conservation philosophy, there was need to consult the ancestral spirits to check if the collapse of the wall was some form of communicating the anger of the spirits, or it was another form of communicating other concerns of the spiritual world. And all these consultations would involve brewing of traditional beer, kind of ceremonies. And these kind of philosophies are finding it very difficult to be accommodated in the modern conservation approach to Great Zimbabwe. And in the mid-90s, there were some attempts by the government to outsource experts from France to come and assist in the restoration of a certain wall at Great Zimbabwe. And I have taken an extract from a daily newspaper in Zimbabwe, where one concerned member, probably from the local community, was complaining about what the government had done. And I'll read this extract where the concerned writer is saying, "We are very concerned at the state of affairs at Great Zimbabwe. The decision by the government to engage the French to rebuild the ruins is stupid and ill-advised. They should have consulted the elders of the area, but we are treated like outsiders. I understand that one wall which they built with cement collapsed, showing the supernatural powers of the spirits. We must follow our tradition if we want to prevent the wall collapse." So this kind of sum up the traditional philosophy behind the conservation of Great Zimbabwe, which I said it is now very difficult, or it is now competing with the scientific and the Western ways of looking after Great Zimbabwe. And he introduced my main focus and my thrust in this lecture is to look at the role of the traditional stonemasons who have been part and parcel of the conservation team at Great Zimbabwe from the colonial era to the present. And these stonemasons, though they've contributed so much in the conservation of Great Zimbabwe, their voices and concerns have been subdued by the educated curators, conservators, and other experts who have been trained in scientific conservation. But for those who may not also be familiar with stonemasons, in Zimbabwe, this is a skill that is so much embedded in indigenous knowledge system. It's a skill that is not trained by formal institutions. It is a skill that is passed from one generation to another through traditional means of apprenticeship, as well as inheritance. Because from my personal study, I've noted that most of the skilled stonemasons to have worked at Great Zimbabwe emerged from the Mugabe clan, who at some point resided in Great Zimbabwe, looking after the site as custodians. And from my interaction with these traditional stonemasons, they always argue that it's a skill that is within their blood. They inherited this from their forefathers and their ancestors. And in Zimbabwe, this skill, besides being hired by the National Museums and Monuments of Zimbabwe, which is the state agents in charge of Great Zimbabwe, there is limited opportunities beyond that or in the building industry. So most of the skilled stonemasonry, they either work on a permanent or a temporary basis at Great Zimbabwe to restore major and minor collapses that frequently occur at the site. And over the years, these stonemasons have participated in different major restoration work. For example, in 1995, there was a decision to restore one of the entrances to the Great Enclosure. And the stonemasons provided their indigenous skill of systematically dismantling the wall and as well as restoring it to its original form. This was, however, done in collaboration and close working partnership with the curators, surveyors, and other international experts. But in terms of the actual restoration, it was being done by the traditional stonemasons. And also recently, I participated in the restoration of the section of the conical tower, where the stonemasons also displayed their indigenous skill in dismantling the problematic section, as well as correcting the problem and restoring it to its original form. Again, recently, the stonemasons participated in a project that was meant to conserve as well as to further understand the archaeological attributes of the terrace section of the hill complex. So whilst stonemasons were dismantling a problematic section, the archaeologists were studying this section in form of excavations. And when they were done, when the archaeologists were done with their archaeological investigations, the stonemasons embarked on a restoration of the section as shown on this slide. So this then shows us that even if the stonemasons are not being equally recognized as experts in the conservation of Great Zimbabwe, they've indeed played a critical role in ensuring that not only the physical fabric of Great Zimbabwe are restored, but also the indigenous knowledge, skills, which constitute the intangible heritage or attributes of Great Zimbabwe are restored. So I conclude this lecture by arguing that Great Zimbabwe has been a meeting place of two types of knowledges that tend to contradict a bit or conflict each other. That is one aligned to scientific paradigms inspired by doctrines from the World Heritage Convention, for example, and the one that is traditionalist in approach, grounded on local beliefs, on local knowledges, as well as on local skills. And my argument is that for the holistic conservation of Great Zimbabwe, there is need to bridge the gap between these two forms of knowledges, where the curators should work equally together with the stonemasons in coming up with strategies and guidelines on looking after Great Zimbabwe, not only the dry stone walls, but other intangible attributes of the site that the local communities value so much and are also interested in making sure that these values are preserved at Great Zimbabwe. So there is need then to ensure that in the ongoing debates, research on Great Zimbabwe, the silent voices of the stonemasons is also addressed in form of researches and debates around the site. Lastly, I would want to thank Dr. M. Doris Cruz, who introduced me to this lecture series and also extended an invitation for me to participate in this exciting lecture series. I would also want to extend my gratitude to the organizers of this lecture series, and also extend my thanks to the serving and retired stonemasons, as well as the National Museums and Monuments of Zimbabwe, the state custodian of this archaeological heritage site. Thank you very much.